Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Strangle your demons and let's go.
Y'all need Jesus!
I can see her lying back in her satin dress in a room where you do what you don't confess. Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping round my back stairs. Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping round my back stairs. Should we go on, men? You know we want to. Let's skip a refrain. Sometimes I think it's a shame when I get feeling better when I'm feeling no pain. Sometimes I think it's a shame when I get feeling better when I'm feeling no pain. Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. I am your host, Eric Hellberg, and you know we're like Einstein over here, man. We have no special talents. We're just passionately curious about all things pertaining to man. How in the hell did we get here, and where is it that we want to go? And in that great song by Gordon Lightfoot, I really need to think about that one. I have a few times. It's a song I can hear over and over and over again. And he's probably wondering, how in the hell did I get here? It's a very common theme in life. If you are going to move forward and or attempt to do something different, you will wonder, what in the hell is all this for? And you will definitely experience pain. But you know what? Never let another man, or I'm going to tell you this either, never let another woman offend you. And if they did, let them know. And never let a man and or a woman know that they have hurt you, unless it is in your tightest circle where there is trust and countenance. Otherwise, be stoic. Take a good look at that person, take them in, and move on. Don't let them see that. That's your job as men. And since that song also spoke of pain, when I get feeling better, when I'm feeling no pain, that's your job to take it too. That's your responsibility. Take it for those who should not have to shoulder the burden of whatever pain you are encountering in your life. Be strong enough to do so. Cultivate that in yourself. And I think maybe old Joe may have taken that ability away from Hunter. But of course, Joe is a classic narcissist. And he built a classic narcissist. We know these things. They were perfect for one another. It was perfectly accommodatable. How? Well, Joe could provide the notoriety of a family name, and Hunter in turn could provide what he gave to Joe. And we all know what that is. And we don't even want to stay in that space. But recently, my daughter just got back from a beach trip on Independence Day. And before we even talk about that a little bit more, I had one of my devout listeners tell me that, man, Eric, you seemed angry. And that's the basis for my initial comments here early on in the show. Yeah, I was angry. And it is perfectly normal to be angry. And if you ever encounter me out in real life, don't you want to know that I actually am real? Otherwise, we can't relate. We can't have any equitable sharing if you're just another cardboard cutout of what you think everyone should expect from you. And you are never going to get that from me. So if I'm troubled, if I'm going through something, I have something that I want to exhibit and or I am feeling a certain way, it's going to come out on the show. Oftentimes these shows are ad hoc and they're always going to be substantive and they're always going to be real. Other than that, what'd that old saying go? Ain't nobody got no time for that, right? And since we're using a little bit of street slang, this is just one real cracker talking about another real cracker, that being good old Joe. And what did Joe just finish doing? My daughter goes to the beach for the 4th of July, Independence Day, and she said as far up and down the beach as she could look were American flags, Trump flags, still Trump 2020 paraphernalia everywhere, MAGA hats, Trump outfits, full-size cardboard cutouts of President Trump that people carried. They took the time and made the effort to physically carry these things and set them up on the beach. So I asked my daughter, were there any Biden flags, any Biden-type folk out there? And she's like, no, Dad, there really wasn't. There was one LGBTQ, FBI, ZYD flag out there. But some of the other dudes said, hey, y'all already had y'all's month. Let's go back to real life. We got the American flag right here. And that's what we're trying to say on this show. And if it doesn't appall you or rile you up to see that our damn country has gone to the dogs, well then, come on, guys, as Joe would say. Come on, man. You don't vote for me, you ain't black. Well, Joe, even the blacks aren't voting for you anymore. So while everyone was celebrating President Trump on the beach for Independence Day, colloquially known as the 4th of July, they trotted good old Joe onto a predominantly African-American radio station in Philadelphia, PA, because we know every time Joe talks, he's from Scranton. He's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he has had an arduous life. And he came up in the school of hard knocks, good old Joe did. So they start interviewing old Joe, and Joe identified perfectly. I mean, from one cracker to another, Joe said he was the very first, black female vice president, and that worked with a black president. And so Joe stumbled a little bit. I think he was actually meaning that he was the first cracker to have a female black vice president, and that being Kamala, and that he, in fact, had worked for a black president who is still working us via the Joe Biden caricature. So Joe was stumbling again. So he basically was the very first female black vice president. And that is really what drew my ire, my insolence, if you want to call it that, on our Independence Day episode. We want to be able to simply be independent men. Men who are not stifled in speech, stifled in our representation, because there has been research done. And did you know what I alluded to in yesterday's episode and many others, is that when a politician achieves the prominence of a federally elected position, did you know they really only entertain about 10% of all the correspondence that they receive? And who do you think that 10% consists of? Is it the American people at large? Or is it what we call a special interest? Someone who they deem of value, some type of importance, and or, in all honesty, only someone's correspondence that, if they do not acknowledge it, could affect them negatively, correct? The rest of us be damned. And that is the conundrum that we currently find ourselves in. And it simply interlaces with the fact of what I just described. There is no way that a man who cannot gather any, meaning the current president, could have beat the man who gathers so many at simply the mention of his name. And we don't want that to befall us once more. So build yourself a life of independence as a man, dependent upon no one. And when you can finally get to a certain point where your independence is not fostered by any dependence upon what others think about you, then you truly become free. It is a very tough thing to do, and most will not. It almost is biblical. If you go to, what does the scripture say? Don't let the right hand know what the left is doing. It's really just a shortened version from Matthew 6:3 in relation to not boasting or seeking recognition for doing good deeds or giving charity to those who are less fortunate than you. Don't draw attention to yourselves. Keep it in secret. Just take care of business as men. I liken it very much to when I would show up on a scene at a property. My job to enter that property, no matter what is going on there, no matter the number of people, the type of animals, whether it was locked, I had to figure out how to get in there and leave with what I was sent to retrieve. And oftentimes dogs are your sentries. When you get into more rural areas, I'm going to tell you, donkeys and horses can be some wily They are very adept, and if an owner can see that a horse or a donkey has fixated its gaze in a certain direction and or to certain movement or activity, they know something is amiss, something is going on. So I would have to get around those animals too. But dogs, I don't care if it's a Rottweiler, German Shepherd, Doberman Pinscher, all the other varieties, they're barkers. That's how they send out their signals. They communicate that something is wrong. Leave that for the women folk. Women are cacklers. They're the Kamala Harrises of society. Let them do that. That's not our job. So what was my most dangerous sentry? Well, the pit bull. The American Pit Bull Terrier, of course, right? They also can have a proclivity to barking, but it is much less than the other breeds. And that is why I always had to be wary. Would one come out of a shed? Would one come out of a house? Would one come out from under the house? So before I stealthily started entering said property, yes, and I mean this in all seriousness, I would look, I would listen, I would feel. Yes, you can become so in tune that you can feel the circumstances around you. And in fact, those animals rely on that sixth sense as well. And I would also use my olfactory sensations, the sense of smell. And I would take all that in and I would proceed. But even then, I could still get surprised. The barkers, I would deal with them accordingly. Hell, most of the times on those breeds I just told you, I'd become friends with them. Or I'd distract them and I'd take care of business. But I can't tell you how many ass-kicking days, repeated Fu Manchu kicks I had to lay down on pit bulls. I'm talking full bore choking out. Yes, you have the largesse over that animal, but they are vicious. But as long as they have an airway, they are susceptible. So appendages grab, sacrificing something so you could get the upper hand. And really, as men, we're doing that every day in life. You will have to sacrifice something to get something. The misnomer of balance is a lie told to you by people who have already achieved whatever it is that they were looking for in life. And now they're simply trying to give you a recipe to follow, typically to follow them and or buy the program. It is all a lie. I'm here to tell you it is impossible. And if you don't believe it, go give quality time to your spouse, to your kids, to your job, and see how long you can do that for. See how long you can balance it into equitable dimensions in your life. Something always has to give. But all that being said, those pit bulls are badass mofos, and I have tangled with many of them, and I have a few of the scars still to prove it, and but ultimately, more times than not, I was still successful by not letting the one hand know what the other was doing, and the pit bull acted with the exact same sentiment without forewarning, didn't talk shit to you. You don't have to worry about a dude talking shit to you. You have to worry about the guy who comes right up to you, sticks a knife in your belly. And that is the American Pit Bull Terrier. He jumps and it's on. And that brings us to what I said we would talk about today, after that long preamble that you suffered through. I think you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it. But we said we were going to talk about Muammar Gaddafi. Oh, yeah, the great African leader, the Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Did you know that Henry Kissinger, once upon a time, our Secretary of State, but an advisor to countless presidents, a man who has served as envoy throughout the Middle East, certainly to the State of Israel because he was an American Jew. Henry Kissinger said, being an enemy of the United States can be dangerous, but being a friend of the United States is deadly. So let's ramp it up. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles. And this song, the Marine Corps hymn, is being sung in total respect. And in fact, I have a whole battalion of hardened, what would I say, motivated Marines right there on the West Coast at Camp Pendleton who enjoy this show. Fortunately, I have a friend who was a Marine Corps close combatives instructor, enjoys the show. He passed it on to his old unit, and they like it. So that's a shout out to you guys, because back in the day, we know that you guys were in Libya. So what happened in Libya? What was NATO's violent intervention in Libya really all about? Especially when the United States State Department, oh yeah, you got to realize Gaddafi came into power in a bloodless coup. Basically a handing over of the government to him. And we can talk about that later. That occurred in 1969. So he ruled Libya for approximately, let's say, 40 years. And did you know when he became the president, the leader, whatever you want to call him, of Libya, they had a literacy rate in that country, predominantly Arab nation, but it had a lot of global influence in it. Libya had been a French colony. Where did the French Foreign Legion cut its teeth and gain its notoriety? Tangiers, Algeria, Libya, all of these countries, Morocco, all these countries right there at the top of Africa. Well, did you know by the time he passed away that country, probably better than ours, had an 83% literacy rate? Do our boys and girls read today? I don't know. Maybe they read on a standardized test that they prep them for, but not out of a book. Anyways, if you remember, Hillary Clinton later on went on to say, and you must realize that when you are dealing with a demon, and Hillary Clinton is that, we know that a demon is a spiritual being, but they take the form of the flesh here on earth. And when you look into the eyes of a Pelosi or a Soros or a Hillary, they're kind of like the bride of Chucky. So you will notice a hollowness around the sockets, a darkness, but they can still have a gleam in the eye. That gleam is not of the divine. It is from the other. And anytime you hear one of these people now, much like Hillary at that time, who said, We came and we saw he died. Kind of like Kamala cackling. And you see the media embrace it immediately, champion that death, actually almost like clap, rejoice. And they run with the story and say that Hillary Clinton, when she returned back to Libya in October of 11, that it was a victory lap. Well, you must realize when that occurs that the exact opposite has happened. They are only so jovial and jubilant when they have pulled one over on the world and or on us for their own devices. That is what brings them their greatest joy. And NATO unleashed an ungodly, you never heard about it, an ungodly amount of ordnance downrange, with downrange being the Libyan nation, where not too long before that onslaught, they were deemed a friend. In fact, Gaddafi's intelligence services were sharing information with the CIA because in 2011, we were at the height of the GWAT, the global war on terror. So who better to give information on Arab terrorists than fellow Arabs? So we were sharing information. And isn't it really funny that we ended up turning to Al-Qaeda-backed militants to achieve the downfall of Gaddafi? I guess in the Middle East, or when you're friends with America, my enemy's enemy is my friend. Do you remember that movie called 13 Hours based on the book that came out on the siege on the CIA annex and our kind of de facto consulate in Libya post-Gaddafi? If you've watched that movie, they get these armored vehicles and they say, hey, thank Gaddafi for that, right? And who was it? These were all holdovers and remnants of Muammar Gaddafi's. And who was it that attacked and killed Ambassador Stevens and our 4 brave men and gravely wounded another couple of others, right? They were so confused in that battle and in the days leading up to it. Which faction could they trust? Which faction could they not trust? But ultimately it was Al-Qaeda who stormed both of those facilities and killed us while President Obama partied in Las Vegas during the actual turmoil, and while Hillary Clinton watched it on a Predator drone feed. She was significantly tied to the outcome in Libya because she was significantly involved in making sure that all this took place. And moreover, if you remember, when the whole server, the private server issue came up and how illegal and traitorous it was for Hillary Clinton to have sensitive classified correspondence at her home on her own private server, not insulated in any way, inoculated from other people around the world from receiving these messages at her own residence. But it was done by design because she was complicit in things that the American people did not know about, nor would they have approved of it. In fact, other than maybe a handful of folks in Congress, they wouldn't have approved of it either. But she said she destroyed it. But we know we are in a technologically advanced age. I am actually going to read you some of her emails. And if we ever go to a Comfortable in Chaos podcast that shows video, I will put these up for you because most of them went back and forth when it was pertaining to the subject of Libya to one particular individual. And I am going to save these for some follow-up episodes that coincide with this one. So for now, we're going to get the concept, and we are going to, like my episode said, keep it simple, stupid, because this is very, very complex. Hillary then went on to say that, Libya is just dissolved into chaos, and it could lead to a civil war that could destabilize the region. And we don't want to ever destabilize any region, right? Because it could fuel the refugee crisis in Europe. Allowing the Islamic State to establish a Libyan haven that the United States is now desperately trying to contain. We were worried about the Islamic State, ISIS, although we created ISIS. We're worried about refugees pouring into Europe, but Europe has been receiving them en masse for the longest amount of time. Very interesting. Okay. And if we're so worried about the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, why would we then hire Al-Qaeda to destabilize Libya? Okay. Well, you have to realize that Colonel Gaddafi loved his people, very unlike our own prominent leaders of today, except the one we're trying to get back into office. Muammar Gaddafi was born in a tent, a makeshift tent in the Libyan desert. He grew up in a Bedouin-type lifestyle. He was a goat herder. He was of the people. Now, yes, you saw many of his indulgences and his extravagances, and they were many, and he was very eclectic. And I will tell you, toward the last few years of his life, he'd probably gone off the rails. There were rumors of cocaine use. Of course, he never employed one male bodyguard. He only used female bodyguards that were virgins. He thought they were more loyal. They posed less of a risk to him. And at that stage of his life, I think he knew what was going to befall him. Moreover, he had played cat and mouse with, most specifically, France, and their desire to have the resources of Libya, a tremendously oil-rich nation, and everything else that that country possessed. But when you play cat and mouse with the West, you will go absolutely crazy. So he probably was at the time of his death, but he could have been like any other leader or anyone else who was deemed a friend of ours at that time. We've pulled many leaders out of countries during regime changes. We have safeguarded many others. He certainly had the resources to DD Mao and get out of there, but he didn't. Even when he saw everything that was transpiring, he did not. And before NATO began their siege, Libya had achieved economic independence. It had its own water. Think how much we fight for water, especially in the western United States. Water is a very big issue. Just go to California and see what all's going on over the issue of water. Libya, in a desert, had its own water. It was self-sustaining in food. It imported none. It had its own oil. It had its own money. You know what it also had? It had its own state-owned bank, the Central Bank of Libya. Did you know they had their own hard currency? Should they have chosen not to deal in fiat currency, meaning the U.S. dollar backed by nothing, they had their own store of 148,000 tons of gold. What was the market value of that? I don't know. But 148,000 tons of gold. They had the ability to actually have a bat, a hard currency. Did you know if you sought higher education in Libya, it was paid for? If you wanted to come and study from abroad in Libya, that it was paid for? Did you know that medical care was free in Libya? Did you know if you wanted to start a business, you received a stipend in Libya? Did you know if you had a child in Libya, it was paid for, at least a certain amount? Okay. Did you know that any of Libya's citizens that needed a loan for anything, whether to expand, to start, to take on a bigger obligation, that there was no interest charged through the Central Bank of Libya. You only paid on the principal. There was no interest in borrowing. And you're like, well, that's impossible. That's impossible, Eric. I mean, how could that be? Well, you're saying we could not do that in the United States? We always were told that it is economically impossible. Free market capitalism dictates that that cannot happen. But yet you can buy insurance and pay and pay and pay for 20 years. And then a tree falls through the top of your house and you have to fight like a damn dog to get them to cover it. You can pay for health care insurance for 20 years, then are befallen with a significant illness and they will cap you out. But that didn't happen in Libya. And you're saying it cannot happen here? You're telling me that we can take care of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 or more? The bloody red baron, he rolled up the score. Oh, I digress. However many tens of millions of illegal immigrants are in this country, you're telling me that we can provide the money to bring them in, give them a phone, give them a stipend, house them in our finest accommodations, feed them, provide them medical care, get them into the system, pay for them accordingly, and then we can ship money off to places like Ukraine, whether you agree with the Israeli conflict right now or not. Send them money. Send aid packages all over the world. And what are we simply doing when we send money all over the world to people who can't stand us? We're hoping to somehow curry favor, and none of that money ever comes back to the average American anyway. It comes back to the top of the top. Since 2022 till present day today, Lockheed Martin has booked another $210 billion of contracts to our allies around the world. War is a wonderful business. And guess what? They have booked another $150 billion in upcoming contracts for stuff that has yet to occur. Lockheed Martin, God bless them. What a great capitalistic endeavor. Okay. So what else did Libya have? They actually boasted the world's largest irrigation system. It was called the Great Man-Made River Project, which brought water from the desert to the cities and the coastal areas. And Gaddafi was actually embarking on a program to spread this model throughout Africa. But yet Libya, what we would call, or America would call, a shithole, was doing better than us. And yes, we can certainly have a conversation today that the same things afforded to Libyans could perhaps be afforded to America, should we start actually taking care of our own. I think that money's there. It has just been willfully steered away from us and given to others. Okay. Well, here is what was the final nail in the coffin. The final nail in the coffin for Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was this. His system was already set in the country that he presided over. He, previous to that, had traded on the open market in U.S. dollars with regards to their oil exports. But he said, you know what? I am tired of the Western influence. And I now want, if we are going to take oil out of our own land and sell it to others, and if the United States or France wants to buy it, then they can pay us in our own currency, the dinar. And if they don't want to do that, then they can pay us in gold. And guess what? It's his country. He has the right to ask that. But another nail was that he said, I am going to spread this out across the continent of Africa. I will develop a pan-African currency based on the Libyan golden dinar. And we actually can back our hard currency with the abundance of gold and silver we have. Not one iota of it will go out and or come in unless we have that stored right here in our own central bank of Libya. And he said that this plan would be designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternative to the French franc. Once you do that, and you mess with the money supply, it's no different than John F. Kennedy. Yeah, maybe the CIA hated him over the Bay of Pigs. Maybe the mafia hated him because he put in Robert Kennedy and they went to war as the Attorney General on the mafia. Maybe the defense establishment didn't like JFK because he wanted to get us the hell out of Vietnam, where we should not have been in the first place. But the one thing that he did was he said, I can't control the gold standard because Henry Cabot Lodge already took us off it. We know our money is phony baloney. It is backed by nothing, but we do have an abundance of silver. Let's get the Federal Reserve to tune into the amount of silver supply and let's back our currency. So just like Gaddafi, we don't need to argue how he was killed. In the case of Kennedy, how many shooters, where the bullets actually came from, who actually was involved. We know he died. We know that Muammar Gaddafi ended up dying. How did he die? He was beat to a pulp. He was sodomized with bayonets, and ultimately he was shot when they pulled him from that culvert. The point is, they died for a reason. They took a stand against an entrenched system that governs the world. It also leads to an abundance of warfare around the world. If you can't continually print money that is backed by nothing, then you can't have the money to finance warfare. Gaddafi took a stand, said, it's my country, we can do better than this, and for that, he had to go. So yes, I think the United States of America could serve its citizenry with much more involvement by being much less involved everywhere else in the world. And if you don't think that money is there to do the things I just specified, how in the world does it go everywhere else except into our own pockets? So until next time on the Comfortable in Chaos podcast, I bid you bon voyage, my burgeoning flock.